Recording in progress. All right, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the 8th Hurt Panel Forum. Let's get started. I'll introduce my panel. We have Chelsea Isdaner of Smoldering Serpents. Excuse me, Chelsea Isdaner of Smoldering Serpents. It's dinner time over in LA, and I'm thinking about soup apparently. TC Houston with Reptile Mountain LLC, reptilemountain.tv on YouTube, www.reptilemountain.com. Phil Leitz with Arids only. And my name is Steve Lewis. I'll be your host and moderator for this panel. As I've discussed with some of you guys, the origin of this panel came from a conversation amongst reptile friends about an overall dissatisfaction with not only what we see portrayed on YouTube as proper keeping, but also just the advice being given out on popular reptile support pages like Facebook. There's so many experts out there, field biologists, researchers, experts in lighting, nutrition, behavior. And yet, in my opinion, too often the hobby looks to one measurement to define success. That measurement is how many reptiles does a person breed? And often that means that we're idolizing folks who are definitely providing a lot of animals to the hobby, but are typically promoting an absolute bare minimum standard of care as the norm. Because we see folks like Prehistoric Pets or New England Reptile, they're breeding reticulated pythons or anacondas in 8-foot enclosures with, nothing but a water bowl that they don't fit into and paper substrate. It leads the amateur hobbyist or small scale breeder to think that that's the only appropriate way to keep them. At least that's my impression. Well, I hope this panel will put that notion to bed. And I have these 3 innovative breeders who do produce a lot of reptiles, but also don't feel it necessary to skimp when it comes to the standards of care for their breeding stock. So with that being said, let's start with some introductions. If you could introduce yourself and give a brief background of how you got into the reptile hobby, what you currently produce and in what volume, and we'll start with you, TC.
All right. Well, hello, I'm TC Houston, and I guess I got started in the reptile hobby like a lot of folks. A garter snake crossed my path, and I felt like I needed to pick it up and take it home. And then just started getting into all kinds of things. And my very first big snake was a ball python before any morphs were ever produced. So, and I still have that wonderful snake to this very day. She's still rocking and hanging out with me.
How many years ago was that?
32
Oh, wow.
32-ish years ago.
Nice.
So yeah, she's a spring chicken. And then now I mostly work with blue tongue skinks. That's what I'm somewhat known for. At least my mom knows about it. And then I also work with some Antaresia, so the Stimsons and pygmy pythons, rosy boas, and a few others that I truly enjoy. And I produce variable. I've been drawing back, but I've had hundreds produced of the blue tongues, and I'm drawing back personally just because I want to focus more on the animals a lot. And so that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I'm glad to have you on. Chelsea, how about you? Can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. I'm Chelsea from Smoldering Serpents. I run it with my husband, Andrew. I take care of pretty much all the social media stuff, so it's probably me that you see posting and everything, but we do all of the care and everything with them together. I am pretty much like TC with how I started. Garter snakes. I grew up in Manitoba in Canada. So I don't know if you know, but Southern Manitoba is kind of famous for the garter snake dens, and I was about an hour away from that. So lots of garter snakes in my childhood. And I started with just geckos. My mom would not have let me have a snake. Snakes are out of the question. So it was crested geckos, leopard geckos. And then when I moved out on my own, I got my ball python, which was my first snake. My husband had a corn snake growing up, and both of us just gradually got more into the snake world, and we actually met through the snake keeping community. So that's what we do. Right now I have a list so I don't forget what we actually have. Right now we have we have 53 snakes at the moment, 22 species. We don't breed everything that we keep. So right now we mostly breed colubrids. Well, right now we breed all colubrids, but stuff like Russian rat snakes, Baird rat snakes, black milks, Honduran milks, We got variable king snakes, Arizona mountain king snakes, and stuff like that. Pretty much the only thing that we'd ever breed that is not a colubrid would be our Brettles pythons. But other than that, we just focus on some oddball colubrids.
Nice. Right on. Welcome. Happy to have you. Phil, same question at you. Introduce yourself, brief background, and what it is that you're working with.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Phil Leitz. My business is called Arids Only. I primarily, my primary focus is Uromastyx, and I also work to a slightly lesser extent with Xenogama taylori and then a handful of other odds and ends. In terms of volume, I didn't write down excuse me, any exact numbers, but each year I'm producing somewhere on the order of 200 Uromastyx each year. And then that doesn't include the sort of side projects and extraneous species, but that's just because, it's the same kind of thing. They don't breed for me every year. Some of those side projects are changing from time to time. If it, turns out something that I wasn't super into, or maybe it didn't work out for the environment that I have at my place, stuff like that happens. So the number fluctuates pretty regularly, but it resides somewhere between probably 200 and 300 lizards every year total, but it just depends a little bit. Yeah, but I got into it just for me, it was dinosaurs as a kid, just being obsessed with dinosaurs, and then eventually getting into I think my mom took me to a pet store when I was quite young, and there was they had like a boa constrictor and an iguana, and I was just like, what, you can do that? And it just, that was it. I was hooked. It was totally all in ever since then. But yeah. Did I miss anything there?
No, that answers my question. Yeah, and you tell me
Cool.
if you're hiding stuff from us. I don't know.
No secrets.
And for those watching too, I wanted to mention, if you had a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat. If we don't get to it in the course of the conversation, I'll throw it in at the end, and we'll be able to get to it. So feel free to ask that, or throw in comments if you want. And it's part of the fun of attending live and not watching on YouTube. So let's stay with you, Phil. One thing I hear some popular channels say about their reptiles is that they're all their pets. Can you tell me what items like heat, light, or enrichment or substrate you provide for your breeding animals, and how that might be different from how you would keep a pet reptile?
Ooh, yeah. So, I mean, I think I'm at a point now where I can safely say that if I was keeping everything as a pet, I probably wouldn't keep it too differently. The only variable might be cage size in terms of the difference, right? So every animal gets ample amounts of space, as numerous I can, different kinds of light and heat opportunities. Lots and lots of different features inside the cage, and those features will include like rocks and stones and slate and all kinds of different crap, different kinds of substrate, different kinds of food items. Just basically I try all the time to go, for the most part, all out with most of my reptiles. So I wouldn't say that I don't think I'd keep them too differently if it was pets. Maybe just, again, I probably go with slightly larger cages. I do keep everything still fairly large cages as it is compared to others, but I just would, if I could only keep one or something, or if I only had a few, I'd probably give them like 20-foot cages, with like 100 different baskings. It'd be insane. It'd be psychotic, but it's a little extreme.
I've actually got, and I said I'd bring it up. I've actually got some photos here from some of your guys' Instagrams that I'll share. So we've got, there's some of Chelsea's, but this is an example of one. What species is that you have in there?
That's a female Uromastyx ornata. Yeah.
And that's a pretty big space. And I could see that, you're doing a lot of things with the, I love, by the way, like roofing tiles and broken clay pots as furniture for my enclosures. Because one, I found them on the ground. And two, it's the same. They're free. But no, they work really good. It's because they're ceramic. But this was what I thought was cool. Can you explain what we're looking at here?
Yeah, sure. So this is the main room at my facility, and things have, it's so funny to see that one, because that was basically, a couple of months after I moved into that space, but things have changed a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it's the pools are all still there and the same. So those are kiddie pools where the bottom, it's two different kiddie pools where the bottom of one has been cut out, and then you flip them over and then screw them together at the rim, and it just creates a poor man's koi pond, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean? And this was made in an effort to give more space to my animals, but not sacrifice the height, that made it so that way I could keep them with open tops and not have them get out. And so I was looking at things like, what do they call them? Aquaculture ponds and, hydroponic stuff. And all that stuff is really good and useful and would have served the same purpose, but was exorbitantly expensive. So this was a quick solution to that.
All right, it's a smart fix. And then, so what it looks like, I see like a UVB bar hanging over, and then heat lamps and stuff over them too. So
yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
they've got everything they need, and they don't have to be shoved on a closet. Yeah,
and multiple lamps per cage too. I think for a long time I was getting away with one, but that was when I lived in a space that heated up pretty. The space was more cramped and compact.
Right.
So it got cooking in there. And so the need for multiple bulbs for basking was less, but now they all have 2 or 3 basking bulbs on every single cage. So,
right. So what do you do for winter? I know that these are some more arid species, but how does that work for you in that space?
Yeah. So, winter can be rough sometimes because, for me, the main fear with winter is losing power and going into a shop full of lizard popsicles, right? So I have a security system, or not a security, well, I do have a security system, but I have a system set up that alerts me to temperature drops below a certain point and power outages and things of that nature. And thankfully, winter, in my opinion, most species of reptile can get, well, not most, but a lot of them can get pretty cold, right? So I basically just try to take advantage of the drop in temperature and make a real solid winter experience for all of my animals. So I don't do too much. I just shorten the photo period, and then because the floors are concrete, the natural ebb and flow of the seasonal temps will plummet the both nighttime and ambient temperatures in the shop. So things will get pretty chilly. Typically it doesn't drop below 63 at night, but sometimes can drop into the high 50s in the wintertime. And yeah, I just don't feed everybody. They don't come out.
Yeah. And that's cool.
Yeah.
So you just keep them right there.
Yep. No change really, other than that stuff I mentioned.
Nice. I'll pose that same question to you, Chelsea, the question about how would they be different if because you have pets, so that's a good one. So how do you treat your pet snakes different from your breeders?
Really not at all. When we get most of our snakes, if we have a good feeling that we're going to want to produce them, we'll start with a pair, but a lot of ours have started as just single animals. So they kind of start as pets, and if we really feel like we want to breed them, then we'll take that next step. So all the caging is basically the same for them. The only thing that we do differently is for the breeding females. We have to be mindful of any nooks and crannies that might be a little bit too tight if she were to lay eggs in there, because sometimes they do, you give them a lay box, you give them options, but sometimes they do decide to lay in somewhere weird. So that's really the only thing that we're mindful of, is just making sure there's nowhere that she could cram a clutch of eggs where we couldn't safely get them out. But other than that, it's all the same for pets or breeders.
Do you take the eggs out and incubate them, or do you let them incubate in the enclosure?
We take them out.
Yeah,
the only snake, because most of the snakes we breed don't really maternally incubate.
Right.
So actually, I mean, if they were to be laid in the lay box that we fill with sphagnum, most of them actually could be incubated in the enclosure, because we don't incubate with heat. So they're just room temperature. So the cage is basically our room temperature anyways. So we were planning on trying our Brettles pythons because they do maternally incubate their eggs, and we'd still love to do that, but we're just a little bit off with their seasonal cycling and they're just not breeding yet. So that'll be a fun experiment if they do go, because we'd like to let her try to incubate them herself.
Cool. And I had a picture of your enclosure set up as well, but we could see it right behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I know you've spoken on the all my guests have been guests of the Animals at Home podcast, and really good episodes that I recommend folks check out. But you made those enclosures behind you, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the process? Why do you guys? What's the benefit you find to doing it that way, or as opposed to buying something? Or tell me a little bit about those enclosures.
I mean, I'd be broke if we bought them all.
Uh-huh.
We have 53 snakes at the moment, and some of them are pretty large. So we added it up once what it would cost us to buy basically the exact same size of cages that we make. And it was staggering. It was about $50,000 plus.
Yeah.
So first of all, there's just the cost saving, but also even beside that, I was raised by a carpenter who taught me how to do woodworking from a very young age. I've built my own house. I've built stuff my whole life pretty much. So it's fun, but it's also super easy for me. I enjoy the process. We do it together, my husband and I. So it's a fun thing to do on a weekend, and you can custom make them exactly how you want. So, and I mean, at the end of the day, when you buy a PVC cage, you are just basically buying the box. So you still have to decorate it and fill it and everything. So just building the box itself saves a lot of money. And I mean, I just enjoy it being a DIY process from start to finish.
Yeah, they look super awesome. So it's always cool to see someone that does. I don't know. I've built a few things myself, but it never ends up looking like that. So it's cool and it works. Hey TC, same question. I know you've got a lot of pets as well, but what's the difference between a pet and a breeder for you?
I wish I could keep them all the same, but I do keep my breeders a little more functional. So not as aesthetic, and the enrichment is a little more focused, and I don't spend as much time with the breeders enjoying them as I would with a pet. So the experience for me versus the experience for the animal might be a little different, but I think the animal is probably similar, as in they're getting the same enrichment, they're getting very similar provisions, heat, light. I would give more space if I could to pets, because I would assume that I wouldn't have as many. I mean, that's an assumption. If these were all pets, I have a lot of the same thing, and that would kind of be weird, or cool. I'm judging, but it would just be a little bit overdone, and so I would probably have a fewer, and then I could use that space to expand. That's probably the difference. And then, of course, the enjoyment. I would spend more time with a pet individually, whereas I'm spending that same amount of time with maybe 12 or 13 animals. And so I'm doing more health checks and making sure that they're functioning correctly, as opposed to simply just enjoying the animal as a pet and that interaction.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you've done some DIY with your skinks, have you not?
Yeah. As soon as there's nothing commercially great about anything breedable sized, or for a breeding size for a blue tongue, that I liked. So I chose to just kind of DIY what I did. I based it off, Ty Park had the idea, so I can't just say it was mine.
Yeah.
But I totally stole his idea and really like it. It just gives me more versatility, because I can use light, I can use top down heat, halogen heat. I still have the functionality of pulling a drawer out, and it's a little bit quicker and easy access. I hate cleaning glass. Dirty glass offends me. So that's part of it. Yeah, but I like the DIY, like Chelsea said, like it's actually therapeutic to get to just like work on that stuff, and then especially when it's functioning. It's not therapeutic when you screw it up, but when you do it right, it's really therapeutic.
No, I get that feeling. I can see that. So TC, I'll stay with you. And so one of the questions, or so one of the most common arguments that you hear from the big breeders is that they have to keep the animals in small spaces because they have so many. And you kind of touched on it with doing a similar thing and just keeping them organized and having the tub pull-out system. But so how do you make that sacrifice? How do you decide, when is enough? When do I have, when is my space maxed out as opposed to putting them in a smaller bin? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. That happened early on for me. I had to make a decision on whether I was going to choose space or numbers. That was it. And then I had to hold to that. And it was my baseline foundation. And so I felt like space was something that I could provide more opportunity. There was more variability in space to provide enrichment, to have healthier environments. There's more diversity with that. And so from the beginning, I just said, it's going to be space. And if I'm going to have more space for the animal, I'm going to have less animals. And then I had to work that backwards and say, all right, if I'm going to do a business and that goal is to make money, if it's a hobby for fun, then there's no goal for making money. And you can lose money all you want. And that's awesome because you're enjoying the animal and you're getting something that way. But as a business, the function is you make money or at least break even. And so I had to find a way, what was I going to do? So it actually had to be a decision on what I was going to breed in the first place. Because if I'm going to breed something that's not going to produce money, then I sacrifice that space for a lack of cost, for a lack of return. But if I put something that might be worth more money in that same space and still do well, then I can have a better return. So I had to make the decision before I even went into breeding. When I went from just hobbying to going to be a business for reals, I said, this is what I have to do and I won't compromise size. And so I just had to be hard on it with myself. And I spent many late nights just drooling over an animal that I really stinking want, but I cannot justify what it is. Because if that's my standard and that's who I am, then I lose who I am. And I don't want to do that, no matter how pretty or cool it is. So that was kind of where I was.
Yeah, that's I respect that. And then what we talked about it a little bit earlier. What all animals are you breeding?
Right now I'm breeding consistently blue tongues, so the Australian northerns and easterns, as well as rosy boas, Stimson's pythons, pygmy pythons, and next year should be pink tongue skinks, as well as a couple tortoise species, the little testudos, Hermione, and the Russians, the little Russian guys. And what else is there? I've got a few other little projects that haven't gone yet and hopefully will soon. I really so I've chosen small species so that I can give big space for the most part. And that was the intent, because it's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was wondering if it's kind of a chicken or the egg question. I always like to think of what the opposite response would be, and someone said, well, of course they can keep them in big space for the animals. They're choosing small snakes and small lizards. But I think it's also the same, like you just mentioned, that's a choice you made, right? You didn't want to breed large. You would, if I may say, you would enjoy breeding large animals, all the reptiles you could, but you know that you want to give them the right space that they need, right?
Yep. If I had more space, I would have bigger animals. And that's just where it is. That's what I do. But I want more animals, so I need littler animals so that I can have them in the right amount of space.
Chelsea, I'll ask the same question to you. How are you able to breed in numbers? You said you had about 53 snakes, 22 species. So how do you do that without putting them all in little tubs?
Well, one thing that I is not a secret, and I actually like to tell people, is that we actually started with all our snakes in racks.
Mm-hmm.
So initially I had 3 of my own snakes when I lived in Canada. And Andrew was a little bit farther along in his snake keeping journey. And I think luckily it's getting easier for new people to start off on the right foot in the right communities with good guidance. But unfortunately, even a little while ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. So when we actually got together and combined all our animals, they were essentially all in racks, and big racks for their size, but still in racks. So we've actually purposely moved away from that entirely. For any permanent snakes, we use racks for hatchlings, and we always will. I mean, we do it because it works well. If I found they did better in actual enclosures as fresh hatchlings, we'd do it in a heartbeat. But we do find that racks have worked better for us for that. But all of our permanent animals, all of our grow outs, they're all in cages that are about the length of their body, if not longer. So how we do it is that we're, first of all, really, really lucky to have a pretty big house, which not everyone has that opportunity. It's also just the 2 of us. We don't have any kids. So all these extra bedrooms, we basically just fill up with reptile cages. Behind me is 1 wall of cages, and there's a whole other room where both walls are just stacks of cages. Our dining room is now a small zoo. Like we've sacrificed the space for our animals because we love them enough that they're a large part of our world. So the way we do it is we just make a choice of how much space do we want to give up, how much money do we want to put into caging, what can we reasonably take good care of and still spend the time with all of them that we want to. And basically, you know, I feel the same way, like TC said. Sometimes I make the mistake of scrolling through Facebook or Morph Market or something, and I just about lose my mind because I see something that's just out of this world. And sometimes I go ahead and I find the space. Like there are snakes that I have that I didn't intend on getting until I saw a listing for them, and it was worth it to make the space, but I don't get the animal until I have a spot in the house marked out for their enclosure. So it takes some self-control. And unfortunately, I think the reptile community in general tends to promote impulse purchases and hoarding a little bit, where it's like, it's a joke where when someone gets their first snake, people are already joking and kind of ribbing them a little bit. Oh, just wait, you're gonna have 3 more in the next month. So you kind of start off with that encouragement, and so we just have to kind of learn to have some self-control and put some boundaries. And the reality is we don't produce that many. We have 53 snakes. That adds up to a lot of space for caging. But, you know, I wrote down my list of what we produce, and some of these are really big snakes, like our Vietnamese blue beauty snakes. They're going to be in 7-foot cages. Our false water cobras, the female is a monster, so she's getting a 14-foot cage. But these snakes, they're huge, and especially to have a pair yet, that's now double the size. So some of the really, really big ones that we just don't have the space for a pair, we just keep as pets, and that's fine. But when all is said and done, and I look at the list of what we produce, I mean, we're looking at maybe 70 or 80 hatchlings a year tops, which isn't nothing, but it's also not huge scale. And if we had the room, we probably would produce a few more. I don't find that the workload of them is overwhelming at all at this point. So if we had the space, I'd be happy to do more. But at the same time, you know, I think with snakes in particular, I'm not really in the lizard world that much. We have an Ackie monitor, but as far as just the snake community, you know, I see breeders basically bragging at how many thousands they pump out in a year. And I know this is jumping ahead to one of the later questions you asked, but it ties in here too, is our definition of what a small scale breeder is and where their place is in the community might need to shift a little bit. You see some people who I've talked to some people who do produce a couple dozen babies a year, and they think that's nothing, and it it doesn't give them the experience they need to have a voice and to influence people. And I think that maybe just changing our idea of what a breeder actually is, that you don't have to produce thousands to participate in these conversations, you know?
I agree completely. I think that's a trend that is popping up more and more. And you hear it both ways. You'll hear conversations with people and say, oh, everyone's a breeder now, you know, they kind of roll their eyes and say it. And to an extent, I understand the issue, because it's like, you know, someone doesn't know what they're doing and they haven't had a snake eat yet. And they're asking, you know, why won't my snake eat? Oh, by the way, what should I pair it with? You know, and it's in just, it's, you know, rainbow boa in a ball python rack, you know, and so there's that sentiment too. But at the same time, there is a little bit of gatekeeping, and I do think that it's nice to see the trend shifting the other way, and that we are moving towards folks just breeding what they can do. And I know a lot of people, even people that breed hundreds and hundreds of snakes, still have full-time jobs on top of it. So it's a second job for most people out there. Thanks, Chelsea. It's good. I mean, it sounds like for both you and TC that it's a commitment. And then Phil, what would you say? What makes you decide to keep the way you do as opposed to just maximizing volume?
Yeah. So I certainly agree with many of the things that both Chelsea and TC said. Some sort of related, I feel like I can relate to a lot of the same sentiments. I too have gone through, I spent some time keeping many geckos in racks and some snakes in racks for years. And, you know, I still think that there are ways to do that, you know, in an increasingly ethical way. I like to see people making decisions about, you know, if I'm you know, I know one guy who keeps tons of boa constrictors, and he'll bring out his boa. He's got a whole separate like room where he just, you know, he'll take a handful of boas out at a time and just throw them into this, they're out of their rack and into this room with branches and a window and all these things. And I think that's a cool way to go about it. You know, that you're actively trying to make better choices for your animals. But for me, it's kind of it's a mixture of, it's a balance. It's a constant balancing act. And what I mean by that is, I mean, I always try to start with the most possible space and the most possible lights. I do make choices, like TC was saying, to select for smaller species in an effort to make it so I can keep more animals with more space in the same space. So for example, I have Egyptian Uromastyx, and they're in 8.5 by 5 foot pens, and I just have one adult pair. And I couldn't do any more, because I just, you know, in the same amount of space that I have right now, where these two Egyptians are, I could put 10 ornate Uromastyx, you know? So if I made that choice, it would be technically the wiser financial choice, right? Because ornates it'd be more animals of something that's in very, very high demand. But, you know, so I try to make choices like that, you know, balancing out. I want to keep Egyptians, but I don't want 100 of them, right? And then when it comes to cage choices, you know, if it turns out I've got to, you know, move a few animals around, or there's this other animal that I want to add, okay, maybe I'll make the decision to take an animal and move it into a smaller cage, but then I'll do something else, right? I'll go all out on the furnishings inside that enclosure, and in a way that maybe half the other animals don't have, not because they're being neglected in any regard, but just because I want to make the most efficient use of a slightly smaller space for that animal, in an effort to help make it so that animal's not getting like the shorter end of the stick by getting a little bit smaller of a cage, right? So granted, you know, in my mind, you know, I'm keeping most of my adult ornates, or most of my adult Uromastyx anyway, in 6 foot diameter kiddie pools. So it's not, it's, you just move one from one to another. But every now and again, I might have to move something into a smaller box. And if I have to do that, I just try to make other choices to try to help balance those things out. There's definitely some animals that I avoid because, I just might not want to put in the kind of time that animal is going to require. And some of that's just a personal choice about the kind of quality target that I'm looking to hit for every single one of my animals. It doesn't matter to me if it's, and I'm sure TC and Chelsea would agree, not a single one of my animals is ever treated differently than the other health-wise. And I still have the same quality target for every single animal. If it's a pet or if it's a breeder, the target is the same. I want that animal to be at its best, right? Period. So, oh man, I kind of just lost my train of thought a little bit, but basically, I'm trying very hard to make choices about the animals I want to keep. Oh yeah. And not get too wowed by something that out there that I know is just going to be, it's going to be a little bit too much, or if I take on too many projects. I currently I'm the only guy who does the work. I don't have any employees. I don't have, I have occasionally I can get some help from my mom, but you know what I mean? But all those animals at the shop, and we're talking peak, mid summertime, there could be 600 animals in that space, and it's all me, man. So it's like, you make choices that help keep you sane and also help make it so you're not giving any animal subpar care,
No, absolutely. And that's kind of what I wanted. I felt like it was a little bit of a question to let you guys brag a little bit just about being good people. But that's what I think is so great about this hobby is that you do get to meet folks that care, and care about the animals. And it's exciting. I kind of, it seems to me one common thread that I've seen from each one of you guys throughout that question is that it's a commitment that you have made to the animals, and to not sacrifice. So there's this really big desire, and it's the same for me. I don't produce any animals, but still when I see a new animal, it's like, oh, I would love to get I have my hands on a white throat monitor, for instance, which it came across my way. It was a rescue, and it was mine. It got legally put in my name and everything, but we have this Cape Banded South African white throat monitor. It's about 4.5 feet from nose to tail, just this beautiful animal. But I had to find a good home for it. Like, even though this became my lizard, it's just, there's no way I would have had to use the rest of this room. It'd have been the reptile cages, and he's also like the roommate, which the cats wouldn't have loved that. So we had to
I don't think the cats would have been alive, man.
No, yeah, it would have. It could have gone either way, really.
That's true, yeah.
But yeah, it's great. It's great hearing you guys talk about the commitments you make. Phil, we'll stay with you. So what would you say some of the biggest difficulties you face with your style of keeping and breeding your animals?
Oof. So the two that stand out most immediately in memory, one would be heat. That's I mean, the vast majority of stuff I keep is a desert species, the only exception being the giant anoles, which are in a separate space that stays cool. So heat is one of the biggest issues, because Uromastics are sun-loving badasses, right? They need a lot of heat, and to do it right, you got to have a lot of lights. And when you have a lot of animals and each animal has a lot of lights, you get a lot of electricity. So that gets a little challenging sometimes, but kind of a minor hurdle in my mind. I think the biggest one is probably hatchling housing. And the reason is because baby Uromastics are exceptionally territorial, and you can have a clutch that tolerates each other just fine for as long as they need to be around each other before they ship. But then you can have some, like, for example, Uromastics nigroventris, flavofasciata, maliensis, that whole dispar complex. They are assholes. And I've got some pretty much from day one that are fighting from the minute they get out of the egg. And so if you've got a clutch of 20, you're looking likely at 20 individual cages, and that's just for one clutch. So that can be really, really difficult. So during the springtime and summer, there's a lot of cage juggling, man.
Yeah.
But I would say and so the desire is to, when you start getting like that, you're like, man, there's got to be some rack I can put these things in,
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes to mind. But I just don't go that far. I stick to, I'll make makeshift racks out of sweater boxes and stuff, but it's still an open top desert vivarium. It's just, there's 20 of them and they're slightly smaller than normal. And I'll maybe ship those just a little sooner because they're also a little bigger when they come out anyway. So it's just a balancing act. But yeah, there's a lot of that's the biggest one that it would stick in my mind, I would say.
Thank you. TC, what about you?
Temperature is definitely a thing for me as well. It's like the battle of the temperature stuff going on down there. I've got the air conditioning running and heat lights going, trying to get ambient temperatures down on the cool end so that I don't bake everything, but then also getting the temperatures up on the other side, because a lot of my animals are in kind of a screen topped type of a rack, and so that the heat just goes right on out. And so there's hard to do it. So like a vivarium would be more simple, but then there's glass and I can't do glass because it offends my soul. So I have to do, and so there's air conditioning and heating at the same time, lots of play with that. And then of course the outside temperature influences. So it's a constant battle. I adjust our thermostat in the house often, and then I'm adjusting the thermostat in the air conditioner often, and then I'm changing the light temperature just a little bit, and it's just it's a fight. And I know there's fluctuation in the wild, but at the same time it does cool off in the wild, and I need it to cool off sometimes in the house. And so that's the biggest challenge. And of course, baby housing is another. Skinks grow really fast. They eat and poop every day, and they grow super fast. So within 2 or 3 weeks or a month, the little dude is this big, and then the next thing you know, so you have to either get them out quick or you're swimming in big animals all of a sudden. So that's a challenge as well.
I could see that. Thank you. Chelsea, what about you? What challenges do you see?
Well, listening to that, I'm aware that snakes are a lot easier than lizards.
Yeah.
We have one Ackie monitor, and I love him to death, but he is a lot higher maintenance than even my highest maintenance snake. So as far as challenges with breeding and this type of setup, I honestly can't think of anything specific. Most of our snakes are just good with room temperature and a really low bulb for a warm spot. We have a lot of temperate colubrids who just don't need extra heat. I already mentioned just making sure that the cages are set up so we don't get any clutches stuck anywhere, but it's never been an issue so far. Hopefully never will be. But other than that, I mean, honestly, and this has nothing to do with the way we keep them necessarily, but the most frustrating and difficult part of the whole breeding process for us is just some stubborn hatchlings not wanting to get eating. But I don't really think that has anything to do with the way we keep them. Possibly a little bit, because while we do use racks, they are quite big for the size of the hatchling. The tubs that we use are at least the length of the snake, which, some people who use very small racks, and I don't really have a strong opinion with how people start their hatchling snakes, because I mean, it would be great if we could start them all in nice, big, naturalistic enclosures, but snakes and animals in general don't always make sense. I've had people tell me, well, they should do great if you just toss them in a properly set up enclosure. They should do great, but that isn't always what happens. And I found that balancing a very simple space in a rack, balancing that with still giving them room to move multiple hides, climbing opportunities as much as you can do in a rack. Balancing a relatively simple and smaller space with still giving them enrichment has given me the least amount of headaches with getting them started with feeding and establishing. So, I mean, it's not really a big problem in the grand scheme of things, but we'll see when we get to some of the other species. Like there are species that we have that just are not mature enough to breed yet. So I anticipate we'll get some additional problems to work through. We have some like, we have neotropical bird-eating snakes, Phrynonax specionotus, that are, can be a little bit difficult to get started as babies. They do want to eat birds, it seems. And Andrew and I have a feeling that they might naturally eat stuff like small frogs, which is obviously a little difficult to get in captivity safely. So my feeling is once we get to breeding those guys, we'll probably come across some more challenges because that species in particular also do really well in our boreal setups right from babies. So we're likely going to have to be setting up some larger hatchling enclosures for them. But as of now, it's pretty much smooth sailing. Fingers crossed. It'll stay that way for a while.
I noticed that none of you guys mentioned cleaning as a major challenge. Do you guys use cleanup crew to help, or is it not that? Because that's the other thing I see. And Chelsea, we'll start with you. It's a lot of especially snake breeders are popular on YouTube, right? But the environments are all just paper, and the reason why they do that is so that the animal goes to the bathroom and they take the animal out, they take the water bowl out, they take the paper out, they wipe it down, they put everything back in, and that's it. So what do you do for cleaning, Chelsea?
Well, so funny enough, the people who don't keep the way that we do, but we are friends with, their first reaction when they see our cages is some kind of a snarky comment about cleaning. And the funny thing is, like I said, we started keeping in racks and we still do use racks for babies. And what's funny is I actually find these enclosures much, much easier to clean. We don't do bioactive. None of our enclosures are bioactive. So there's nothing else helping us there. And of course, it does depend on the snake. Like our false water cobra likes to destroy her enclosure. So when the time comes to build permanent enclosures for a species like that, it's going to be much more minimalistic. The background, I don't know, you probably can't really see behind me, but the backgrounds in my enclosures tend to be pretty heavily textured, like rock. She's not getting that in her adult enclosure. That's tough to clean off. But honestly, most of our other snakes, they just kind of pick a corner and and
nice.
Yeah, that's Calcifer, our water snake. We actually just lost him a couple of weeks ago.
Sorry, but I knew that'd be a little bit sore subject, so I'm sorry about that, because it's
okay.
A really beautiful snake. But like, you could see these, I mean, really good detail for all of these animals. It's that's really cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, so I've done a bunch of different kinds of backgrounds at this point. I basically make a point that every stack that I do is different because I just like figuring out what works best. So you can see that stack right there. That's a picture from before it was quite done, but that's one of our newer stacks. And that one you can see has much less detail on the actual walls. I actually don't think I put any rock detail on the walls. It's just on the edges of the shelves. But, the way I waterproof the texture like that is I can just spray it right off. I can disinfect it right in place. So what I was actually going to say before was that the funny part about switching from racks to enclosures is that when we do still use racks for quarantine, we do start them on paper towels so we can check easily for mites and we can get fecal samples. And the funny thing is, I actually find that keeping them on paper is much grosser than using substrate because I'm not sure if I'm just unlucky, but every time I keep a snake on paper, even if I have it going up the sides of it, they go under the paper and they just go on the bottom of the tub. So, I mean, You can take it out. You can obviously hose it down and clean it up that way. But I honestly find that spot cleaning is a lot easier with substrate that I can just scoop a big handful out and do a full bedding change every now and then. Besides quarantine for the initial few weeks, like our babies have normal dirt and mulch and moss substrate in their racks just because I find it a lot easier to keep clean. I also find that, I do spot cleaning whenever I can. I'm walking through the rooms, looking at all the cages a couple of times a day. And I don't always catch, a little pile in the corner. Sometimes I don't always catch it immediately. And the one thing that I really like about keeping in enclosures like this is that when I do miss some waste, it dries out really quick. So in a rack, what I find is that it stays, I add ventilation to the tubs, but it still stays kind of gross for a lot longer. And in enclosures, when I do find something that I've missed, it's just completely dry. So I find that overall, it's actually a lot easier to keep things clean and sanitary with larger enclosures like this, which is pretty much the opposite of what most people seem to assume.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and I find too when they're on paper, because I'll do that for quarantine new animals, and when they're on paper, it gets everywhere, and then they seem to go through it, and it covers them. So you're not just cleaning the enclosure when it's that time; you're cleaning the snake too, because they've been in it, and it's just everywhere. So interesting. What about you, TC? Is cleaning a big hassle?
Yeah. Well, it's just time commitment is what it is. And I found it's interesting. Like I use Rex too for babies because I just have so many and there's no way to keep them, and they rip each other's legs off if I put them together. What I found is interesting is that the bigger the enclosure, the less likelihood that they're going to like smear it. So I've always noticed if I put them in a bigger rack, there's less opportunity for them to slip and slide through their poop daily, as opposed to something a little bit smaller tub. So that was always like first priority is like, I got to get this thing into a bigger place so it stops diving through its poo. And then like Chelsea said, like as soon as I get them off paper, like the first couple weeks, actually it's the first week they're on paper just to see how they're pooping, making sure it's good. But as soon as I can get them off paper and onto substrate, life gets so much easier because a spot clean, the substrate absorbs some of the moisture around it. So it avoids a lot of the smearing in general, but there's still smearing, but it's a lot less and it's a lot quicker. And I think it's more hygienic for the animal. But then it's just time consuming because with lizards that poop every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, you're cleaning every enclosure every day. And when you got 80 baby skinks, that's a lot of baby poops. So it adds up quickly. So that's one of the things that I've noticed is that space. The more space, the less likely they're going to get it messy. And so it's easier to spot clean, which is really nice.
That's a nice added benefit. What about you, Phil? What do you think about cleaning?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing struggle. I feel like cleaning is 90% of what we do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm fortunate to a couple of things. The knolls that I have are all they have a cleanup crew. So I don't really have to clean those cages other than the food bowls. And then anytime they, if they happen to lay one somewhere that the cleanup crew can't get to or something like that, then I might have to get in there, but it's very rare. The Euros, the babies, of course, I start the babies on paper towel. It's just it's easy, it's fast. But with the Euromastics, there's the added benefit of most of them take dry. Their crap is just a dry pellet. I mean, it'll when it first comes out, it's a little moist, but it dries out super fast, especially under the heat lights. So the adults, I don't even bother cleaning them daily. I mean, sometimes I do if I get kind of bored and I'm like, I might as well, I'm right here. I might as well pick the turd up. But most of the time I clean them out every 2-3 days. I'll go through and scoop out poo, but it's again, it's dry as a bone by that time. And I do other things to try to mitigate the cleanup process too. So I use gravel and sand. And so that tends to not only dry out the poo faster, but it also kind of, it just creates this thing makes it so it's less likely to get smeared around. You know, if you've got stuff on newspaper or paper towel, even if that poo sits there for a little while, it might dry out. But if that animal runs through it, there's nothing to stop it from just, you know, smearing. Whereas when I keep them on, you know, if you give them a lot of features, especially gravel and a lot of big stones and a lot of rocks, the animals have a much, much higher tendency of laying a turd, and then just, if they step on it, you know, it's like half on a rock, half not. So they don't step on the whole thing, or, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So there's just less, you just get less of that. I think weight is another big concern that I've dealt with for a long time, because most of my animals are, again, desert animals. So, stacking up, you know, if you got sand and gravel, and then you're stacking a bunch of stone and rock and logs, you know, you got 150-pound enclosure in no time, right? So I try to take steps to kind of mitigate that problem by, in a lot of cages, I use this thing called rock on a roll. It's a rock mimicking pond liner made for koi and like garden ponds and stuff like that. Yeah. And it's just like a shelf liner that has a rock hard, it's just stone texture on the top of it. Okay. And so I will take that and cut it into sheets and either use it for sections of cage bottom, or for, you know, I'll take like, you know, a big piece of manzanita or grape wood, and I'll lay this rock on a roll on and through some of the branches. So it kind of mimics like a rock pile, but without the 150 pounds of rock underneath. That one's been actually kind of a lifesaver for me. It's just an excellent product. I've been covering nest boxes with the rock on a roll with the hole cut in it. You know what I mean? So I'll take like a Rubbermaid container, pop the lid off, and I wrap it with rock on a roll and just coat it, and then cut a hole in rock on a roll, and it keeps it totally tight, and only the female can get in and out. But it makes it so she can crawl on top of the nesting box, and it's not just some big plastic feature, which it's not a problem. It's just, you know, I like to do that kind of weird stuff, you know? So cleaning is a problem. I'm a neat freak. I have to dust all the time. So I mean, sometimes I have a kid that every now and again I'll pay him. He's I'm a jiu-jitsu coach as well. And he's one of our students, and I'll sometimes pay him, you know, $20 and have him come over to my shop and dust all the lights and stuff, because I don't want to do it. I hate doing that. And then just like TC, glass is offensive, but I can't stand cleaning it. So I clean the very, very few cages I have that are glass or have a glass front. I clean them. I clean those doors only for photos, man. I hate it. That's the bane of my existence.
That's funny. This episode is brought to you by Rock on a Roll. When you need rock on a roll, get rock on a roll.
Hey man, it's a really sweet product. I'm telling you.
It's one of those simple things that taking the extra steps like that just to get that texture is super important, because it's not just something for it to step up on, but it's something to step up on that its instincts can wrap around, right? Because it's got that gravelly, rough texture. Yeah, no, that's super cool.
And it'll have, there's health implications of that too, because one of my problems with not just newspaper or paper towel, bare bottom enclosures, but also in Uromastics anyway, people used to use bird seed all the time. And every now and again, you still see people doing it, and it's fine. It's got its perks or whatever, but with all those smooth surfaces, or the bird seed, for example, the animal when it steps on something, it's a totally unnatural texture. It's just like how humans, you know, if we walk around on concrete all day, you get problems in your feet, knees, and back. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because you're not meant to do that. And it's the same thing with the reptiles. So, you know, if they can't grip properly, then you know there's going to be downstream neuromuscular and probably metabolic issues as a result of all of that. You know, it may not be in 5 years, but if you've got an animal like a tortoise or a ball python or a Uromastyx that's going to live 50 plus, it's going to show up, and you don't want it to show up ever. So, yeah.
No, that you're absolutely right. We won't dive too much into it, but it just
Yeah,
blows my
sorry.
mind. No, it's good. It sometimes, and it goes from keepers keeping their snakes and getting them as big as possible and just really overfed, and bearded dragons on tile, and they end up with joint issues. And it's, if these are breeding animals, it just, I don't see the rush to do it, and then to basically lose that animal in 6 to 8 years as opposed to getting 20 years out of it. It just seems like a poor investment to me. But like
Agreed.
I said, I don't breed, so what do I know? TC, we'll jump over. Can you let me ask you this? Can you highlight something that you set out to do differently from the beginning, and then also tell me something that you've recently learned about the animals you breed?
Yeah, good question. So starting from the beginning, I wanted to have genetic integrity. And so I wanted to track my animals' lineages. I wanted to know where they come from. Starting out as a zookeeper there for a while, we did the stud books and we track everything. It's not just about what I can produce, or it's not just about what I have, but 40 years down the line, what do we got? And so, and my heart is to not take too much from the wild anymore. If we don't have to, we can use the resources we have captive wise. So one of the things I started to do is to track lineages, and I'm not exclusive in that. I know lots of other people do it, but it was something that was important to me. So I traced back some of my animals from where they were traced. I got threatened by some girl's dad because I was trying to bug her about where she got her lizard, because she sold it to me and he threatened to beat me up. But I was just wanting to know where she got her darn lizard so I could track it. And so that was something that was really important to me, because I feel like down the line, we can have a little bit better genetic integrity for our animals, and it's a healthier overall population, especially those in like closed groups like the Australian species, or some species that just are from regions that aren't open to export anymore or for wild collection. And then it's just good conservation practice. The other thing, I guess you said, what was the other question?
What's something that you've learned recently?
What I've learned recently, my animals are going to do their thing, whether I influence them or not sometimes. With at least just recently, these guys went down for brumation without asking. I was like, hey, they said it's time, and I was like, no, you have a few more days actually, but they just went down for it early. And so I'm starting to learn a lot more about them knowing their own system, their own cycle. They're really in tuned. It's almost like they evolved to live on their own without human help. And so
weird.
I know, right? So it's kind of neat. I'm excited about that. It's messing with my plans, but I'll figure it out and I'll just adjust, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah. That's great. That's when I got into reptiles a lot later, more as an adult. I always thought snakes were cool as a kid and stuff, but it was once I realized that there were animals around even before like primates, and that these were sort of this prehistoric thing that is not too terribly different from what we have now. That was just, it blew my mind to even think about having one of those in my house. And so then I jumped at the chance. So that's great. I like that. I like that perspective. Chelsea, we'll bring the same question to you. Can you highlight something you set out to do differently from the beginning, and also tell me something that you just recently learned about the animals you breed?
Okay, well, like I said, we did start in racks. So we didn't really, even once we started changing the cages, we honestly didn't have any kind of mission in the beginning. We've really just kind of done our own thing and adjusted our expectations and our goals as we go. And along the way, we kind of learned some things that are common in the reptile world and the snake world that we kind of felt like we needed to take a stronger stand against. So, it's kind of evolved with time, what things we want to focus on, what points we want to make. The one thing that we've already talked about that was important to us once we started switching our animals over to enclosures was that whole thing about not compromising on our standards, regardless of how many we might want. You know, I would personally love to have many more false water cobras, but it's just not feasible. And so this is something that we this was probably our first real goal that we set for ourselves, was just to never compromise on those standards. You know, even once we get a baby snake, even if they're, 12 inches long when we get them, we plan out their adult enclosure before we even get the hatchling. So we've done pretty well on that. Another thing that along the way we learned was really common, that really started bothering me for a variety of reasons, was the amount of inbreeding that we see. And it's not only the amount, but it's certain practices that seem to almost encourage or force inbreeding. For instance, when we started trying to buy some less common species, we'd run into this very common problem of females are sold as pairs only. So the problem with that is that you end up with a brother-sister pair. And inbreeding is not the end of the world. It's both necessary and inevitable to some degree. But trying to do some work here, like TC said, with keeping track of lineages and keeping our captive population healthier, it is important to try to outcross when we can. So once I started realizing how common it was for breeders to only sell brother-sister pairs, we immediately decided this was going to be something that we would never do. And we never planned on it before, but really making a point of selling singles when possible. And, sometimes that means, initially we thought it was going to mean that we'd end up with a bunch of male snakes. But the reality is that the customer base that we've attracted are mostly pet keepers. So the reality is we actually often end up with more females at the end of the year, because people seem to more often want males for pets. It's funny because these breeders who force pairs only seem to be selling to a totally different group of customers that are breeders themselves or aspiring breeders. So they're grabbing all the females they can, and then the initial breeders are stuck with a bunch of males, and that's why they start doing the pairs only. But I actually haven't had that problem, which I'm very happy about. And we've also, coming up in the next few years, we will have some species that we have that are brother-sister pairs. We just couldn't find an unrelated pair from a reputable breeder. So our way of kind of dealing with that situation is that we're going to say no pairs. We're just going to sell in singles only, so that the inbreeding stops with us. And so, that's probably going to cost us a couple, it might take us a little while longer to sell all the babies, but who cares? We're never in any rush to get them out the door. So there's stuff like that kind of can make things harder on us as far as time and effort and cost and everything that goes into raising the animals. But there are things that I just kind of question how they became a problem to begin with, and how, this amount of inbreeding has been overlooked for so long, and you see it becoming a real problem in certain species already. I am not involved with the indigo world at all, but you see it in Eastern indigo breeders talking about it online, the serious issues they have with inbreeding at this point.
Sure.
And I'd really hate for other species to start having those issues. But other than that, I guess probably the biggest goal that we set out from the beginning was just to keep adjusting and keep trying to do better, even if it's just tiny bits at a time. We can't, nobody's perfect. So we have these big, beautiful cages, and I look at them and they're still not done to me, because I would like to add, a ceiling hide in this one, or some ropes to climb on in this one, or an extra humid hide here. And so I guess the biggest thing at this point, the biggest ongoing goal for us is just to not stagnate, and to keep learning from other keepers and our animals themselves, and just keep trying to do better, because there's always something better to do.
Yeah, right on. Lori asked, she said, why do people do that? Sell in pairs only. I don't understand that. I have my guess. Do you know why that's a thing?
It is because when you're selling to these larger breeders, they're largely selling to people who will eventually want to breed themselves. So, you know, a lot of people, when they have multiples of a species, they'll have one male and 3 females. So the females are of higher value to a breeder. So these big breeders basically don't want to get stuck with a bunch of males.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, fortunately, with the group of people that seems to be attracted to us and the hatchlings that we sell, is we've actually we've had the opposite problem, and it's not a problem at all, but we usually our males are gone first because people want them as pets. But yeah, that is why the pairs only thing starts, really, is just to avoid getting stuck with the boys.
Right. Right on. Phil, I'll ask the same question to you. Was there something you set out to do from the beginning? And tell me something you've learned recently.
Yeah, sure. So from, I was keeping before I ever thought this would ever become a business, right? So there was no, at that time, I didn't have anything that I was sort of thinking about specifically setting out to do. But once I decided it was going to be something more career-like, for me, it was just transparency. I wanted to share everything that was going on at my place, good and bad. Be very open and honest about mistakes and changes of mind and changes of heart, on given topics, and just try to be as just straight up with everybody as I possibly could be, because I felt like when I was getting in very seriously into the hobby anyway, a big trend that I think still happens is people don't really post any of their failures. Mm-hmm. Some people do, for sure, and it's a changing trend. But I just wanted to share everything that happened, good and bad, and be very clear about what went wrong if something went wrong, and be very straight with if I changed my mind on something. As far as something I've learned recently, I feel like, at least with regard to the Uromastyx, it's like minutia, like noticing little things, little preferences, like, oh, they tend to prefer a hide at this angle, at this kind of size, it's like little stuff like that. So I don't necessarily have a great answer for that one, but I would like to add to the question that Lori asked in the chat, if you don't mind. There are situations in which pair-only circumstances are warranted. So, for example, Uromastyx yemenensis is a species that I breed that happens to be probably the rarest Uromastyx species in captivity, at least here in the US anyway. And for whatever reason, they can breed relatively high in terms of males. So the females are more valuable, much less common, but that's not the justification. The justification would be that I don't want single females going to pet homes, because they're not at a place in development as in terms of a captive population where, we can't afford to lose a viable female, because there's so few of them. We need every one we can get. And so I won't sell solo females to people, like, at least for pet circumstances anyway. I'll make exceptions if it's someone who already has a male or bought a male for me last year, something like that. I agree. Chelsea's right on. There are people who do it so they don't get stuck with excess or surplus animals that they might have a difficult time selling. So I'm not down with that necessarily, but I just was going to note that there are a handful of situations in which it can be a useful tactic.
That's good. I appreciate that. Super. We'll stay with you, Phil. Get to the last question before we hit our lightning round and say goodnight. What would you like to see improved upon in the hobby at large? This can be anything from how many reptiles are sold, the types of reptiles, care for reptiles, et cetera, et cetera. And what would you personally like to change about how you keep reptiles? If anything, you don't have to.
Yeah, right. Everything. Top down change, man. Now, so yeah, as far as hobby wide, there's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, I'm sure all of us will agree that baseline level of care, and I don't necessarily mean baseline level of care for the average herper, even though that could come up. I'm talking about baseline level of standard of care for pet shops and first time keepers, period. Like that's because if you change those two things, I mean, how many people are going to go the other direction? Like, turns out I didn't need a tank for this thing at all. I could throw them in a box in the closet. Like it's just not likely to happen, or less likely anyway. So that's one I would say. And then the other would be, I'd like to see the base price. I've been on other shows where I've kind of hammered the like the jacking up of prices of certain stuff, which is a totally different discussion and a healthy one to have. But I would definitely also like to advocate for bringing up the base price for even the cheapest of reptiles that we get. In my mind, like I recently got, in the last 2 years, I got into the Cuban giant anoles, and a Cuban night anole, you can buy them for $15, maybe $20, right? Yep. And for my money, or not for my money, but for my ethics anyway, it's just not adequate, man. You can't be doing that. Like you got to bring it. It should at least be $100. Like even your most common, whatever, because when you bring their price down that low, I think you're encouraging people to see them as both disposable and simple. And keeping these Cuban anoles, I mean, I was that guy for, I can't tell you how many years I just wrote them off as like this, they're kind of a cheap, trashy throwaway lizard, right? They just, I mean, not like literally, but I mean, I knew they were dynamic, of course, but I just didn't have the respect for them that I do now. I mean, keeping them, it has completely blown me away. They're one of the coolest things I keep now. And it bothers me that you can go down the street and buy one for $25. Like my 16-year-old nephew shouldn't be able to go buy that. I mean, he should have, there should be a base, and you should some baseline level of expectation of care and within reason. Yeah. So that's one thing I'd like to see changed. As far as stuff I'd like to change about my stuff, I just want more light. I want, right now, the thing that everybody's turning on to, and some people have known forever, is that visible light, good quality, high value, high quality visible light. I just would love to do more. I mean, if I could, I'd love to be able to keep everything outdoors one day, but it's just not really in the cards. But yeah, and I'm always looking to bring up my baseline level of care. So yeah.
Yeah, right on. It's funny because I keep only snakes, so there's a big argument, not an argument, but there's a big push towards UV lighting for snakes, and lizard keepers have known that for decades now, that they need UV. Period. Right. And it's funny because we're still learning too. Yeah, that visible light is much more necessary too. Excellent stuff. TC, I'll pose the same question to you. What would you like to see change in the hobby at large? And what do you think you would like to change on, if anything?
I love this hobby. I'm grateful that it exists. It's given me a lot of joy, and there's a lot of good people that have done hard work and they love their animals. But I'm with Phil as well, as I'd love to see that, of course, that overall upping of the care, especially for newbies. And I can echo his sentiment on, I think of it like a car. If you buy a $500 car off a used lot, it's a great car, you're happy to draw it. But if you save up and buy a $150,000 car, it's interesting. You don't usually see those parked at a meter on the side of the street. And you don't see those jumped up very often. They're really treasured. And And so it's not that I want to see a raised entry fee, because I want to welcome all kinds of people who have all different financial.
Oh yeah, sure.
But and not but and I do want to see the animals cared for, or at least respected a little bit higher. And unfortunately, our society values money as the way that we bestow value. So that's what I'd like to see change, is that money isn't the value of the animal. That the animal has its own intrinsic value. I don't know how to do that. It's just a great idea. And
Go full elitist, man. Just get everybody, just crank the price up. Only the rich, right?
$1,000 entry fee. No, send it to me. I'll take care of it. No, I'm kidding. And also, like, I want to see people's goals change to progress. Just there's a lot of stagnation. We've got 90s level keeping still. It's like, we're good. I mean, nobody's wearing parachute pants, and everyone texts, you know? Oh, well, sorry.
Yeah, Phil.
To quit, right? Yeah.
MC Hammer, man, all out.
That's it, all the way, man. So I want to see that elevate. I want to see that us kind of make a commitment to grow. And that was my goal from the beginning. When I said I started out with this standard, it was a goal standard. It wasn't that I had arrived, but that was where I wanted to be. And so, and I'm still trying to do that. And so I'm still not there. And so I guess that leads into where I want to change. I want to start keeping my animals outside. Unfortunately, it's like 20 something degrees out right now. So that's not in the car. I do have heaters outside in my outdoor things, trying to heat them. It's not working, but we're trying. And so I really want to move everything for summertime, not everything, but most everything, including skinks, outdoors in enclosures. And I found out that's very expensive. And so it's going to be good. It's going to be a lot. We're going to do it. It's a goal.
That's it. It's good though. Have lofty goals to work towards. Maybe just a little bit at a time, right?
That's it. That's it. Baby steps.
I like it. Chelsea, we'll throw that out to you. The last question: what would you like to see improve in the hobby at large and within your own collection?
Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is less fighting. Honestly, I go back and forth being online on social media because while I do have some strong opinions on things, and it does bother me seeing such poor care sometimes, the worst part of it all is honestly the way that people talk past each other and just go into full fight mode immediately. And then everyone gets defensive and nothing gets done. And I've actually had some really good conversations with some of the I don't want to say old timers, but the older guys, the guys who have been keeping snakes for longer than I've been alive, and then some who I feel like a lot of the more advanced care kind of keepers, I feel like a lot of these keepers write off these old school people, and they obviously are stubborn, but I feel like there is stuff to be learned there, and there are conversations to be had. And I've actually had some really good talks with some of these older guys who initially were pretty closed off to the idea of any kind of improvement in care. And it's not like I was teaching them something. It was a good back and forth where we both learned stuff. So I feel like just trying to be more understanding with people, seeing where they come from, understanding that there are different ways to keep animals well, and not everything's going to look the same. There's no checklist where you have to do this, this, and this, and then you're a good keeper. So I feel like just working towards, we're already, the reptile community is already kind of on the outside a lot of the times. So us fighting within ourselves is not doing us any favors. So that's really the biggest thing. To me, I also, I agree with the price, the baseline price. There's some snakes that I will be producing that are probably under $100 snakes. And my biggest concern right now is finding them homes that are going to value them as much as the snakes that I sell for, $300-400 plus. And again, luckily I have a customer base who seems to tend towards appreciating them for the animals they are. But, you see breeders selling to the first person with cash, no questions asked. And I sometimes, I don't interrogate people, but I do like to talk to them for a while before selling them one of my snakes. I just would like to get a feeling for what kind of keeper they are and their goals and what kind of life they're going to give this animal. Because I would like to see the appreciation for the animals as living beings that are going to live potentially decades. You go out and you spend $50 on a corn snake. That's going to live 20 plus years. It just doesn't quite add up. So yeah, stuff like that is really what I'd like to see changed. I don't know if it's possible, but
What about for yourself?
for myself, just continuously picking away at stuff. Really, I think we have a pretty good baseline. I'm happy with, the caging sizes and the layouts and stuff. But like I said, I look at them and I just see places to add little things. And as we're letting these snakes settle in for a couple of years into these enclosures, we really start to see the way that they use certain things. And if I look at any individual snake, I can take a guess at what kind of enrichment might benefit them most specifically. And so, over the next few years, I would just like to continually make adjustments and add new things in for individual snakes tailored to what they like to do and what they'll use the most.
Right on. Well, guys, thank you so much. So we're going to jump into the lightning round. I noticed each one of you mentioned that you want to see the value of snakes either not associated with money or that the money value matches sort of where they should be. And so I'll just say that anyone watching and checking this out, that they should pay you guys whatever you ask for your snakes, because you guys are fantastic breeders. So if it costs, triple the price, that's just what they should expect to get the quality animals. Guys, let me start with you. Chelsea, what's your favorite plant?
Oh, gosh. Probably string of pearls.
Okay. Good. TC, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Yeah, we saw your dog earlier. He's big. Phil, what's the most overrated reptile?
Oh God. Ball python? Sorry.
You're not the first person to answer that. TC,
I don't know.
Or sorry, Chelsea, what's the most underrated reptile?
Oh God. For me personally,
no, it has to be the correct answer for everybody. What's the most
oh
underrated
gosh, the
reptile?
one and only answer. How much time do I have?
It's a lightning round.
Honestly,
Chelsea,
None.
Oh God. Honestly, probably off the top of my head, bull snakes.
Cool.
Yeah.
TC, what's a reptile you would love to keep?
Tuatara.
A tuatara?
Oh.
Yeah, for sure.
In Magic.
Nice.
Damn.
You got to move to New Zealand and be a zookeeper. Phil, what's a reptile you would never keep?
Oh God, croc monitor. I can't touch anything with big pointy teeth, man. I can't. No, hard no.
All right, fair enough.
I can't. My hands are too jacked up. I can't take any more bites and anything. You can't.
You don't want to get bit by one of those. Chelsea, what's the worst movie you've ever seen?
Oh my God. Twilight.
You watched it.
Wow.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, cool. TC, if you could switch lives with anyone, who would it be?
Who's the guy that plays Thor? I just want a hammer.
Oh,
Hemsworth.
Hemsworth.
I just want a hammer and be able to walk into a room and just drop a hammer.
So you would trade lives with Thor, not Liam Hemsworth, because if he does that, he could get like arrested or,
Yeah,
you know.
just Thor.
Thor, you could do
Oh,
Thor.
man.
All right, it's a lightning round. There's no rules. Phil, are you
Yeah.
afraid of spiders?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, guys, that's it. So thank you, Phil, Chelsea, and TC for joining. It was an absolute blast having you guys on. And Chelsea, I loved your answer about not going after the folks that have been in this game for a long time, because I mean, what the heck do I know? I've been keeping reptiles for like 17 years, and like you said, there's people that have been keeping snakes longer than I have been alive. So even though they may not think that a ball python needs out of a rack, there's a ton they know and stuff we could learn. And if we could all come together under one big tent, I think that's just great in the way it should. It's something we should all aspire for. Thanks, guys. I think you guys have excellent profiles to follow. If anyone is concerned, we saw both Phil's and Chelsea's DIY setups. TC, sorry, I didn't post yours up there. As I was saying it, I was like, oh, he's got good stuff that I don't have pictures of. So that's my bad. That's a bad host. If you guys are worried about doing the same quality of work, just keep in mind that Chelsea is a professional artist. So don't feel bad if your home enclosures don't look like that. And I've seen Phil, his sketches as well. He knows what he's doing. But have fun with it, guys. I enjoy speaking reptiles with all of you. Everyone have a good night. Brittany says we need another one of these. Yeah, we'll see in another month or so. I usually hold one every month. We do some one-on-ones and stuff too. So follow the channel and all that great stuff. Guys, thanks again. It was an absolute blast. Everyone have a great night.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye. Hope you guys enjoyed learning something.